Here is our I can statement today. It says I can draw and name the characteristics of various lines, rays, and angles. So the focus of the lesson, as you can see, is drawing and naming lines, rays, and angles and the characteristics that they have. Today we're going to be looking at quite a few different vocabulary words, so we need to keep them straight. It might be a good idea to write these down on a separate piece of paper. For today's lesson, you are going to need a separate piece of paper and a pencil to follow along. The paper can be blank or it could have lines, your choice. If you don't have that, pause and grab those materials. Alright, we'll start off by identifying the vocabulary that we're going to use during today's lesson. The first one we're going to talk about is ray, and a ray is part of a line that begins at an end point and extends infinitely in one direction. And the way we draw that is we start with an end point, so we'll draw a dot, and then we draw part of a line, so one side has an arrow going out infinitely in that direction. So a ray has an end point, and we draw it with an arrow to show that it goes on and on forever in that direction. The next one I want to introduce is line. So I'm going to skip angle for now, and we'll go to line. And a line is a set of points, so we'll put in 2 points, that form a straight path that extends infinitely in opposite directions. So it goes in both directions. So we draw a line with 2 arrows. So notice we have points in the middle. These are not endpoints because they are not on the end. There's one more vocabulary word that's not on here, and that's called a line segment. And I'm not going to use that very much today, so I didn't introduce it as a vocabulary word. But a line segment has endpoints on both sides, and we can measure it because we have a place to begin and a place to end. The other two, ray and a line, we cannot measure because they go infinitely in 1 or 2 directions. So there's no end to start measuring from. Alright, next we're going to go to angle. An angle, we're going to say, is formed by 2 rays sharing a common endpoint. So we're going to say that this is the endpoint, and I'm going to draw 2 rays out of this. And remember, this is what a ray looks like. So there's an endpoint, and it goes infinitely in one direction. So I'm going to draw 1 ray, and then we're going to draw another ray coming out of that same endpoint. So there we have an angle, and the angle is the space right there. And we measure that in degrees. You might remember that if we talk about a right angle. So I would draw 2 rays. A right angle has exactly 90 degrees, and that's the measurement of this space. An acute angle, like this one here, has less than 90 degrees, so it's a smaller space in between those 2 rays. Next, we're going to introduce perpendicular lines, and perpendicular lines are lines that meet and form a 90-degree angle. It must be exactly 90 degrees. So this would be a right angle. All of these would be exactly right angles. Those are perpendicular lines. We can also have perpendicular lines and line segments. So if I had an endpoint in the middle there, and we formed a right angle like that, this would be a perpendicular line and ray, because we have 1 line and 1 ray. So the important characteristic there is that the line segments or rays meet to form exactly 90 degrees, and that's perpendicular. Parallel is an easier one to remember because I see that there are parallel lines with all of these L's. So parallel would look like this. And parallel lines are lines that are equidistant. Look at the word equidistant, equal distant. So they're equally far apart no matter where you are on those lines or line segments or rays. Some people think of them as train tracks. Some people think of them as the L's in parallel, and that'll help you remember what parallel means. And this last one I'm pretty sure is new to you, oblique. I've never taught oblique lines before in 3rd or 4th grade, but 5th grade we get to introduce oblique lines. And oblique lines are lines that intersect at non-right angles. So notice I have an acute angle there and an obtuse angle there. Acute and obtuse. So that would be an oblique intersection, or oblique lines. They can intersect in a number of ways. They could be just a little bit away from 90 degrees, but I noticed that these are definitely not 90-degree angles. I have some that are obtuse and some that are acute. So that separate piece of paper that we talked about at the beginning of the lesson, I would, if I were listening, I would write down these words and maybe draw a quick picture so that I remember them a little better. So you got ray. Remember, it goes forever in one direction, but it has an endpoint. An angle is made up of two rays that start from one endpoint, and it forms an angle right there. A line goes on infinitely in both directions. Perpendicular lines or line segments or rays form to meet right angles. Parallel are equidistant. Remember we said equal distant, so that anywhere along those lines, line segments, or rays, they are the same distance apart. And oblique are lines that intersect that do not form right angles, so they cannot be 90 degrees. On the next video, I'm going to have you follow along and quiz you on some of these, so it might be helpful for you to have these in front of you.